And I prepared slides. Again, this is an adaptation of stuff we've done earlier together based on the 6 activities for successful partnerships. So as Andrea mentioned, HealthNext has been working in this area of partnership development for 30 years of our own existence. 8 years ago, working with Health Quality Ontario, HealthNext did some research and identified these 6 activities that successful partnerships undertake. And 4 years ago, we began using this framework in our work with the HC Link program. A lot of the resources you'll see that we're sharing are coming through the HC Link program. And just to highlight at this point, if you're working bilingually, that many of these resources either are translated or have an adapted, or even potentially some of them were done in French first. There's a lot of everything's available bilingually, or almost everything. So what else did I want to say? Yes, the other piece that we're kind of adding into this work, and some of it is your work or work of other groups as well, but we did 3 years ago collaborate with the Ontario Public Health Association on a project called Collaborative Leadership in Practice, which really looked at equity within our partnerships. How do we have more shared and equitable leadership as we work together? So a lot of the things that you've touched on in terms of what you're proud of, it was Ontario-wide, seeking to learn from some local partnerships that were really prioritizing that, and to create opportunities for them to share their knowledge. So we also have some tools and resources that were developed through that project, and we'll share the website with you later. So here are 6 activities. So it's easy for us to go and think, oh, 6 activities, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It is not a linear process. Although if you are starting, a new partnership, you may well be starting with Connect and with connecting. But overall, these are activities which we need to be tending to at all times in our partnerships. And there will be moments where we are focusing more on one than on others. But where we find this framework really useful is just as a touchstone for making sure that we're not dropping any one ball that may be important to the success of the other activities that we're trying to do. So I've even started to see this, I think this is the new graphic that we have now. I see it as a little turtle shell, where it's like we're moving along, and often it moves pretty slowly when we're doing good partnership work. Of course, as somebody noted, when the environment is there, we can move more quickly. But tending to all of those and sort of keeping everything well cared for in our partnerships brings the kinds of goals, and also it brings the process, is the way of getting there that is important to us.
I like the turtle analogy, Jillian, because sometimes you have to pull your head back into your shell and take a break for a little while before you reemerge. And
yeah, exactly. Sometimes we have crises and we need to tend to them. Yeah. So just another thought on these 6 activities. You already do this naturally. We're doing it all the time. For example, if we plan a really nice icebreaker, which will deepen shared understanding at the beginning of a planning day, we're fostering that shared understanding and reconnecting together while we're preparing to plan. So just think of this framework as something that can enrich your work. Maybe find a simpler lens to look at the complexity of it all, because the complexity will never go away. So where we want to take you now is we're going to go through these activities in a bit of a linear fashion and share with you a little bit more depth on some of them. In particular, the ones that we've found partnerships are often facing more challenges with. Interestingly, Connect and also celebrating, evaluating, and renewing have been the ones that have come up the most, but we do have stuff to share regarding all of them. We'll just spend a bit more time on those two. So, do you mind forwarding my slides for me?
Of course not.
Thank you, Andrea. Okay. So, good connections start with reflective process. So although the word connect makes it sound like we're going out there, it's also that sort of connect to who am I, where am I, and what is it that we're wanting to do. And another piece of that is also, as we move to connect with others, being open to learning and to changing as we do that. So we have a couple of tools we're going to share, but before we do that, I just want to share 2 reference points that you'll probably be familiar with these kinds of images and ways of thinking that are important in terms of how do we connect and build partnerships in ways that are transforming relationships towards equity. So next slide. I changed the top right there a bit. I pulled out that standard PowerPoint thing and just put in this network map. Just because I think network maps are fantastic and help us think about our partnership, but we also know, if any of you have done network mapping, that there's much, much more complexity than what meets the eye just in a single map, and that's why you often do different layers of mapping, and you also talk about them qualitatively to bring out the complexity. And so in the same way that you might look at this map in the top corner and say, okay, these blue dots could be men and the purple dots could be women in a network, we know from all of the learning we've done around intersectional analysis that we can't simplify it to that level. So when we locate ourselves and think about, who am I entering into a partnership, this tool is coming from the City for All Women Initiative and the City of Ottawa from their toolkit, which is in the handout. I believe, too, that you folks out west have also an adapted version. I think that or Julia as well. If you do, you could put that in the chat box and share it with others. But on the outside, right, we have all the ideologies and the systems which create inequities, and then within that we have organizations which generally tend to be hierarchical, so there's dynamics to look at there when we're going into partnership, and then within that our own social location as people with lived experience of oppression and or privilege. So in particular, when we're coming from a privileged social position, and certainly if we're coming with funding, there's a good chance that we're going to be coming from a more privileged social position than maybe some of those other partners that we are hoping to engage with. The importance of reflecting and doing that self-reflection, and even talking about it as well with others as we approach them, or in the middle as we're working with them to recognize our experiences of privilege and access to power when some of our partners may not. So there's a lot of complexity there, and this is one tool for reflecting on that. Next slide.
Jillian, can you tell, for people who don't have access to the webinar, can you describe visually your slide so we know where you are in the presentation?
Oh, okay, yes. So that was Ellen, right, who's following on the... How are you doing, Ellen?
It was Sylvie.
Sylvie, you're not able to be online with us?
No, just I have no. So, but I know there's somebody else online that doesn't have, it's not connected, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you send the slides to Sylvie as well?
Yeah, I do have.
Okay.
I think she's speaking on behalf of Ellen.
Okay. Ellen, how's it going, Ellen?
Well, I did get the slides. Thank you, Robin. And I have tried to go online because the fire alarm testing has stopped, but for some reason, although I set it up, I can't get on. So I'll just, hopefully I agree with Sylvie, if you can be as descriptive as possible, that would be appreciated.
Okay, so the one we're on now is called Locating Our Work, and it has a triangle.
And it's slide 13.
Thank you.
Okay.
Got it.
So the triangle of oppression, which illustrates the sources and forces of oppression and how they reinforce each other, I find also to be a useful reference point for our equitable partnership work. We are constantly, no matter what kind of great systems of collaboration and community-based research that we create together in our work, we're still working in a broader system where the dominant ideologies are about who's producing knowledge and who has knowledge and who doesn't, may not align with the work we're doing, and as well the institutions and the systems, which can include our own organizations, our own ways of working and habits of working, as well as the funding system as well that we work in. These all impact our work. So if an individual experience, often this triangle is used to talk about maybe an experience between myself and Robin, but if we take that to be individual experiences in our partnerships, this framework can help us look at them in that context, right? Which I'm sure you, again, are already doing this. but it could be a helpful tool that you could bring to a table or a reflection analysis, or just looking at yourself in terms of understanding, you know, what are the forces here that are impacting our partnership work, and particularly when we're trying to focus on making changes towards equity in the world and also making changes towards equity in our partnership. Lauren Burrows, this says in the bottom it's adaptive. Of course, I think this triangle has been around for a long time. I had first seen it in union education work. But Lauren Burrows, who did a webinar for us last year called Becoming an Ally in Partnerships, has some great examples as well of microaggressions that can happen in partnerships as part of this webinar workshop, which she put on for us last February. So the link to the slides is there, and it's also in the handout that you'll be getting, or that you can download now, or we'll be sending to you afterwards. So those are sort of the two framework pieces, and now I want to share with you some of the tools that we created with that project I talked about, Collaborative Leadership in Practice. Again, all of these tools are available in French as well.
Slide 14.
This is slide 14 now, so there's 4 pictures, and it says Tools for Equity and Allyship within Partnerships. So 2 of these are particularly related to the activities of connecting, and you can't really see them too well here, but I will describe them to you. So the one on the left is called the Equity Analysis of Group Membership. It's a template. It's an Excel chart. Both of the Excel charts also come with an introduction and orientation text. But the chart, what's nice about this Excel chart is you can use it and you can also adapt it yourselves. I think with all of these tools, you'll probably find that you want to adapt them to your particular context. But just knowing that they're a good source to begin with, because they are based on other research and evidence and practices of other partnerships. So the one on the left is one of those long laundry lists of different equity-seeking groups and communities, types of organizations. It also asks the same question that Cowie wheel asks about what kinds of organizations are being represented around the table. So if you're gathering people for some work together, or if you're wanting to reflect on who's around the table right now, you could use this, this analysis tool to support those conversations. The other one, which looks like the Excel chart there, the other Excel chart, is called a Partnership Conversation Starter. And this is an adaptation of something that we used for that same project when we were approaching and wanting to build partnership with groups that were more regional or community-based, where we were recognizing that, okay, we're the resourced organization here, we were provincially and all that, and we want to partner with you. And we wanted to make sure that they felt that, first of all, that we were recognizing how we were situated differently, and that we were open to talking about that with them. And also that they could choose what kind of a partnership role they wanted to have in the project. So this particular tool has 3 types of community involvement. It's the community there in a consultation role, in a collaborative role of co-creating, or in a lead role where they are leading and we are supporting, and with certain capacity supports to their leadership. So that's a tool that you might want to explore as well. In the middle there at the bottom, it says Becoming an Ally in Partnerships from Intent to Reflection and Action. That's the PowerPoint that I just mentioned by Lauren Burrows. And finally, the Cowie Stories on the right, where you see sort of money sign with wings. Cowie is a city for all women initiative in Ottawa, that the Diversity Wheel also comes from. They have tremendous resources online. And we did a story gathering activity with some of their community partners, so women from diverse marginalized communities who are part of Cowie came together with us, and we shared stories, documented their stories, also did an analysis after that. They did an analysis using a paper quilt activity, and that's what one of those squares is from there. So this is really a collection of very simple short stories of how Cowie works in partnership with women who are from very different marginalized communities, and what is it about the way they work in partnership that supports those women to feel included and have a voice. So it's a very different kind of tool, and I think that's what I loved about this project is we actually generated, because different people co-created different tools. Some of them are Excel charts, some of them are, you know, workshops, and some of them are stories and images. So there's a real variety. I think you can see there if you go to the CLIP website, which Andrea just put up the link, you can explore that yourself. I don't know if anyone has any questions they want to ask at this point. So finally, the last slide in this section is something, again, you're probably familiar with, the Stakeholder Wheel. We can't talk about connecting without touching this tool. It's a very useful tool, whether you're just brainstorming on your own or whether you're doing a big flip chart version, which I think we certainly did with the political action groups, and Tatiana did a different kind of version with the civic engagement group, so you all had some experience of using that tool. So this version is from the Tamarack Institute, and the link is up there, and it's also in our handout. So it has ideas going around the outside in this version versus sectors. So once again, you can take any tool and adapt it to support your group in doing kind of a collaborative analysis of where are we in relation to others who have an interest in what we're doing, and how might we want to move and shift those relationships. Okay, fostering shared understanding. You already shared among yourselves about how the diversity of who's at your table is such a strength to your partnership and something that you are so proud of. And I can very much relate to that sense of pride when we kind of have this much more complex understanding of an issue or project based on those relationships with people who are very different from ourselves. And so keeping those partnerships alive and thriving involves constantly tending to that. I just have a quick story to share with you that really pinpointed for me the importance of that. I was in it was actually a working group of a larger network, a neighborhood network, and we were meeting, you know, monthly and doing lots of work and lots of activities. But I was finding in a period of time that I was getting frustrated at the meetings, and after the meetings feeling frustrated and sort of having this tug to go and complain to somebody about it. And then I kind of thought to myself, maybe we need to have some reflective dialogue together. So I proposed to the group that we just set aside an hour to do some reflection and evaluation of how our work group was going. And so we did that. And so you think usually evaluation is about identifying your outcomes or, you know, maybe how the process is going. My takeaway from that activity was to really understand that even though I was frustrated with how our work was moving, what felt to me very, very slowly, that for other people around the table, because some of them were working in city departments or they were working in larger organizations and not as community-based, the work we were doing was transformative, and they felt it was revolutionizing the way that they worked. So we often do shared understanding, looking at how do we understand an issue. I mean, there's lots of things we can, opening the floor to kind of just reflect individually and to go around on the same question really deepens our appreciation for the diversity of what's going on in a partnership and appreciating that. Certainly for me in that story that I just shared, after I knew how much this work was transforming these broader structural pieces, it brought a lot more patience to me in the process of the work that we were doing locally. On the next slide, we've got some exploratory questions. So it's up to you, you know, what questions you want to use. Anytime you use an exploratory question to deepen shared understanding, it will probably bring the kind of benefit I talked about earlier. But what we did here was we sort of took, on the left you have 7 questions for knowing your audience, and the references in the corner. This comes from consultants who are teaching people how to connect to your audience when you're doing a presentation. So I just pause for a moment there to say sometimes we've shared these 7 questions in the connect section, because when you're going out to new partners, you know, these might be important things to think about before you get there. But because you're working in partnerships that are mostly up and running at this point, we didn't want to spend time on that today. But what we did do was do some kind of adapted questions, sort of being inspired by those 7 questions of knowing your audience, and turn them into some questions that you might use in a go-around, either at the beginning of a partnership or in the middle of a partnership, or use them as an icebreaker at a meeting. I think the most rewarding partnerships I have been a part of have given that 10-15 minutes to doing a fun or deep or shallow icebreaker at every meeting, because it really does foster that shared understanding and build the team around the table. So these are some questions that you can look at, and some of them are, could go deeper, like what might get in the way of your participation, are really valuable questions to maybe consider that we often roll ahead into the planning and the action phase without really hearing from everyone around the table about what can get in the way. Finally, okay, Andrea, you put up the knowing your audience. I just want to also mention under the shared understanding that one of the resources in our handout is called the North Etobicoke LIP. It's the Local Immigration Partnership Toolkit. And we really like that tool because it's the only big toolkit on partnership that has an equity and inclusion lens, where it really brings in the issue of power, or that we are aware of. And they have a worksheet, it's worksheet number 3, called Creating a Shared Understanding of the Problem. It's just a series of 5 questions that you can discuss as partners to really dive into those different perspectives on what is the problem behind this problem that we are moving forward to try and address. Okay, and finally, to close out this section on the shared understanding, you did speak earlier, a couple of you, to succession planning. If you're familiar with the stages of group development, it starts with forming, and storming is a critical stage where we're getting to understand each other and really negotiate relationships, and then moving to norming and performing. I just want to mention that this is true for new groups that are starting out, but is also true in relationship to any new person coming into your group. So when you have that succession issue where somebody leaves and somebody new comes in, we need to tend to the forming. Storming isn't always a big storm, but it might be a negotiation, right? Because that new person or that new organization will be situated differently and will have different priorities. So there's that negotiating part that needs to happen in order to bring them into that what may have already been a fully functioning group. So this can be a good go-to for thinking about the importance of taking that time, as you had noted earlier. Thank you for listening to me. I'm going to pass you over to Andrea now so you can have a different voice.
Sure. I'm on slide 19. So one of the B's that I tend to have in my bonnet is for groups to be really clear on what it is they're trying to accomplish together. And one of the things that can be a challenge is that as a partnership, we each tend to come from our own organization with our own mandate and our own history, and all of those things that we come from our own particular organization. And when we're working on a partnership project, or when we're working in partnership, it's really important to together have a sense of what it is that we're accomplishing, not as individual organizations, but as an actual collective. And so I found in my experiences working with groups that one of the most important things is to really take the time to create a shared vision for the group. And I've also found that this can actually be, depending on the group, sometimes it can be a painful process. I remember a few years ago working with a group of partnerships across the province who were working on Healthy Schools initiatives. I had 2 hours with groups to develop a vision statement, a goal statement of some kind. And I remember in most of those meetings, it was 1 hour and 45 minutes into 2 hours, and we didn't have that statement yet. And for many of us, it felt like we were just ripping our hair out by the roots. But every single time when I heard from those groups over the course of the 2 or 3 year project, every single one of them said that they were glad that I made them do that torturous vision statement, because what it did is it really grounded their work in terms of what it was that they were trying to accomplish together, and it actually becomes a touchstone for the project. And there's lots of different ways that you can create a shared vision, and boy, I wish I'd had those with that Healthy Schools project that I just mentioned. These are some newer things that we've come across recently. One of my very favorites is called 1, 2, 4, All. It's a liberating structure, and it's very easy to find online with liberatingstructures.com. And it's a way to work with a small or large group of folks very quickly to get a sense of what it is that everyone feels that we can accomplish as a group. And one of Jillian's favorite on the left-hand side of your screen is the paper quilt, where you start with a big question: what is it that I value most about this partnership or about the work that we're doing together? And you can get a sense of all of those ideas from across the different groups. One of the things that's really important here, and one of the reasons why we like these two exercises in particular, is that when you're doing any kind of big picture thinking in a group, is that there can really be a lot of power differentials in terms of the handful of people who speak up all of the time. I am always one of those. And the handful of groups of people who don't participate as much. And with both the paper quilt and the 1, 2, 4, All, it's a way to really hear from everyone, to be more participatory and to try to bring all of those different voices to the table. So once you have a sense of your shared vision, what it is you're trying to accomplish together as a group, you can start to actually plan collaboratively. And again, we have a few tips here, especially to use participatory approaches and to use clear language, to avoid jargon as much as you can, to really encourage collaborative leadership and to support inclusion as much as possible. And also to really take the time to reflect on what could go wrong, to devise plans, to prevent those things from happening, or to be as prepared as possible. Now, one little hint that we always have whenever we're talking about planning is that it's very easy to fall into the habit of spending all of our time planning and very little time actually doing. So try to find that balance between adequate planning and spending all of your time in meetings. One of my favorite planning quotes, and I know Robin is very fond of this too, is it Eisenhower or Churchill? I always get them mixed up. Eisenhower, who says, when preparing for battle, plans are useless, but planning is essential. So just the idea that a plan can change and it needs to be flexible, and you also need to really spend that time doing all of the planning so that things actually happen. We have a couple of tools that Jillian's going to paste into the chat box, and just a reminder for those of you who might be trying to wildly open all of these tools in the chat box that our resource list has links and descriptions of all of these tools as well. But we do have some really great tools in our package that can help you plan collaboratively. So once you know what it is you're trying to accomplish, you have a sense of what your plan is, then you can actually start to implement that plan or to actually work together for change, which is slide 24. And one of the things that's really important is that doing things as a collective is a way to actually strengthen your relationship. There is something very rewarding about a group of people all doing something together and actually accomplishing something. So there's something in this activity that is really important to the collective work. And when that work hits the ground, roles are often a bit more defined and distinct. And it's important here to stay connected through your work plan or your annual plan, through your meetings, through your activities, through storytelling and reflective discussion. Make sure that you do have a clear decision-making process, and Jillian's going to talk about this in a moment or two. And we also want to make sure that groups are communicating in a variety of different ways, because not everyone likes to be communicated with in the same way. A couple slides ago when Jillian was talking about the 7 questions to knowing your audience, One of those things is to really think about how people want to be communicated with. Is it via email? Is it via some kind of web portal? Some people just really like to pick up the phone and have conversations. Some people want to have regular coffee meetings, and that's how they get all of their other information. So, as I mentioned, having a clear decision-making process is really key, especially when you all start hitting the ground and getting your work done. So Jillian's going to talk about that for a moment.
So this image at the top with the question mark and the light bulb on the right, I think is a good, I mean, it says underneath short guide to consensus decision making. It's a good general understanding of any dialogue and decision making process, right? That we start with an opening and introduction here that we're going to talk about. You want to open it out. You have lots of partners around the table. You want to have lots of discussion, and then you want to bring it in towards a synthesis. When we do all-day planning sessions, often at about 3 o'clock, that discussion section, I can't remember who it is who has that, you know, there's an old resource from the 80s or something that talks about the groan zone, which is where you feel like you're never going to come at any clarity, and it gets really complex.
15 minutes before the end of the all-day planning meeting.
That's right. Yeah.
It all falls apart.
So then you want to bring it, you know, and that's the facilitation challenge, to bring it to, but you also have a certain amount of confidence from having gone through it several times, that you'll come to a synthesis, or at least you'll come to an identifying that we need more time to talk about this. Anyhow, so consensus is a very popular approach adopted by groups and partnerships at this time. The dilemma is that we often mean very different things by consensus, and so it's really important to have clarity, have a dialogue. What do we mean by that? Often in groups what we find is consensus is defined as the absence of dissent. Shall I say that absence of dissent? And yet we know, you know, from the process work that we do, and women's movement has all done this kind of analysis about, you know, voices and is there space really for people to express variations of opinion. So a couple of tools that might be useful. I mean, there's a lot out there, and I always say with a lot of this stuff which has been around for a long time, the key lessons are pretty much the same. The font has changed, or maybe it's online now. So, you know, I'm giving you online ones because they're the easiest ones to share, but you might have something back in your bookshelf that you might want to photocopy from a few decades ago. It's all pretty good stuff around consensus. So we have further reading there, and you put in the conflict resolution one, which is great. And so both of those links are now in the chat room for the consensus decision-making article, but there's also a video there, so that's another way of learning about consensus, or watching it as a group and then having a dialogue afterwards. I think an important thing to clarify, so there's different things to clarify about decision making. You know, what is the decision rule option? Like, when you get to that synthesis and to a decision, is it unanimous agreement that you're looking for? Is it unanimity minus one vote? Is it a majority or some kind of a supermajority, like 75%? So all these things, you know, you want to clarify, what is the decision rule? How are you going to indicate, like, how are people going to vote? And I've got these photos down here at the bottom of the thumbs method, because this is something I use often when facilitating, and it's fun to use when a group gets familiar with it too. And what's really valuable about it is it doesn't take as much time as doing, sometimes you may want to do a go around and actually, you know, hear everybody say, yes, I agree, or I'm okay, even though I have some concerns, I'm going to go along with it, those kinds of things. But this is a very quick way, everybody at once, to be able to see, you know, are people completely going ahead with this? I'm sideways because I have a little bit of a misgiving, but I could go forward on this to support the group. And down is really a block where it's like I'm not comfortable and I have to, you know, I have to not support the group moving forward on this. When I'm facilitating a meeting, a sideways, depending on what the question is, I might just not ask people to speak to the sideways, or say, does anybody need to speak to it, or should we just move on? If it's not a really serious discussion, you can usually move on with the up and the side. If you have a down, you want to hear from them. But if it's a more complex discussion, you do want to hear from the sideways. Or you might do this mid discussion to sort of see where the group is at and bring out some of the variety of thinking on a topic by inviting those people who have their thumb sideways to explain how they're feeling or what they're thinking about something. So there's lots of tools out there, and again, if you want any particular help for your partnership, we're going to be talking at the end of this webinar about the other supports we can offer by phone or in person if needed. Feel free to contact us and connect with us more about decision making. We'd be happy to support you.
Okay, so now we're on slide 27.
Okay. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we have quite a few resources in this section, Celebrate, Evaluate, and Renew. But as I'm looking at the time, I'm going to choose to go through them a bit more quickly than I had initially anticipated. So again, you can come back at us if you have any questions by email or by phone and would like to discuss any of these. But certainly, one of the biggest challenges in partnerships is often that there is no time or no resources for celebrating and for evaluating, which makes it challenging to renew. Okay, and as you were mentioning earlier, a lot of the people around the table are there in a voluntary capacity. Even if they're paid for their time, they're squeezing it out of, you know, their time. They're there because they believe it's important work. So the renewal part of partnerships and keeping the energy going is essential to the life and survival of partnership work. So Andrea, if I can put you on the spot as my story here. Andrea says, oh, evaluation, oh, it's boring.
No, it's not, well, there's something about, I'm this terrible person that you say the word evaluation and my brain goes fuzzy and my eyes lose focus. And so I know I'm not the only person like that out there. And so I think in addition to capacity issues and resource issues for evaluation, sometimes it's just the appetite, or sometimes we're carrying some burdens and some ideas around evaluation that make it difficult for us to move forward with them.
So evaluative learning is a nice word to use because the focus is on learning and on exchange and sharing, and certainly it also reflects very much what nonprofit sector's always done, what women's sector's always done, which is evaluation for the process of you know, doing better what we want to do, learning what the experience was like for others, you know, and moving forward collaborative work. But of course, we're also operating, generally speaking, in a funding model where we're being asked to fund on the basis, to evaluate on the basis of outcomes and for the purposes of the funder and not for the purposes of the partnership. There's a great article here, and can you send the link into the chat box there on stop just measuring impact and start evaluating. This is just a blog post, so it's a nice quick read. Evaluative learning is really about getting to the how and why, not just the what. So yes, we still want to ask what questions, but we want to take it deeper into the how and the why, because that's what's going to nourish our partnerships. It recognizes that we need to understand what works in context. So there's not just one best practice. There's practices which have worked in other locations, and you need to have that reflective process yourselves and bring in your own local context in order to evaluate and make decisions. And it also, you know, one of those key questions that we often ask ourselves, like what's working, what's not working, what's helping, and what's hindering. These are the simplest evaluation questions we can ask that can really nourish our partnership, create space for discussions that may have been happening on the sides that need to be brought into the full middle of the partnership, and create opportunities for transformation and change. So there's resources that have been put into the chat box and that are in our handout. We have two resources from HC Link, but they're basically connected on the power of reflection and participatory evaluation techniques. And those resources are both written for partnerships and community-based groups. So they're written with the understanding that you probably don't have very much money, if money at all, for evaluation, and that you're pressed for time. So what can you do that will integrate with the other activities of your partnership work, and that will really generate more shared understanding, more energy, more commitment, and more clarity for your partnership. So these are a couple of questions which come out of those resources, and I'm going to skip along. And those resources also describe specific techniques. There's 3 techniques in the initial one, which is a shorter resource, and then there's another 8 or 9 techniques in the longer toolkit. So lineups are fun. On the top left there, what slide number are we on now?
29.
29. So lineups are fun because you can move around. So if you do it in the middle of a meeting, it can be a good stretch for people. Of course, you have to have enough space in terms of accessibility, depending on people's mobility situations. But it's a lot of fun, and you can ask some questions that you prepared. And I've even been in partnerships where then we've spontaneously asked ourselves other questions, and it's a nice way to really equalize the reflection activity and learn a lot about your group. The head, heart, feet is something that I learned from Popular Education days there, and you may be familiar with. What did I just learn? How am I feeling? And what are my next steps? On the bottom right, you see the paper quilt approach again, which is used in an evaluation context. And this one was a really speedy one. It was done like in 20 minutes. That included the small group discussion, the creating the little squares, posting them, sharing them, and analyzing them. On the left, you see that they've come up with some quick action items on the basis of that analysis that they did. And it was all process related to their team meetings, that one. The spider web in the bottom left is a way that you can really bring in different kinds of questions. Like you could have an outcome question, like what are we achieving, what impacts are we having? You can at the same time have one of those axes can be asking a question about how am I what's my energy feeling like when I leave meetings, you know? And so you can explore a lot of different things on one tool, you know, and in one conversation as a partnership. Oops, sorry. This is a more elaborate tool that's evidence-based, and we recently had the pleasure of translating and adapting it into English, working with the creator of that tool in Quebec. So it's now available online, and it's based on 6 requirements, which are based on research in partnership work, and it has a very strong equity lens and also a strong lens around innovation. Someone had mentioned earlier the creativity piece, and certainly partnerships are supposed to be bringing more creative solutions to the issues at hand. And so there's a couple of indicators in here that really look at, well, is our partnership working in a way that we will profit from that opportunity to innovate, or are we working in ways that are just keeping us doing the same old, same old? Again, this is a bit of a more elaborate tool, but if you're interested in looking at adapting it, we'd be happy to work with you on that as well. That's going to conclude our presentation time, and just looking at, oh, my